This image was recorded in 2017, nearly 18,000 feet below the surface of the Philippine Sea. And this was taken 72 years earlier, in the summer of 1945. Same ship, same exact location on that ship. And between the times those two photographs were taken, 880 men went into the water. The ship was hull number CA-35, heavy cruiser USS Indianapolis. This was the flagship of the Fifth Fleet. Late July 1945, the USS Indianapolis arrived at Tinian after a classified 10-day sprint from San Francisco. What this ship delivered: the components of Little Boy, the atomic bomb. The crew had no idea what they'd just done. They weren't told. You see, this wasn't just a warship. This was the ship that, without knowing it, helped end World War II. And then, just days later, she was gone. On August 19, 2017, a search team financed by Microsoft co-founder Paul Allen, aboard the research vessel Petrel, located the wreckage of the USS Indianapolis in the Philippine Sea at a depth of about 18,000 feet. And what they recorded down there tells a story that no words can. The anchor that they found with the USS Indianapolis, pretty impressive. You take a look at the detail they've got here. You can see the casting marks, Norfolk Navy Shipyard, even the date over here, 1929. Serial number, still visible. Now, I always love digging into the details. And if you look at an image like this long enough, you're going to pick out some pretty interesting stuff. At least I think it's interesting. And let's go up here. You see these two relief holes in the flukes of the anchor. And moving on to these World War II era images, look, you see those two holes in the flukes of the anchor. Another shot of the anchor right here. There are those holes. So you take a look at what the RV Petrel was able to get image-wise close up of the anchor, and I just think that's fascinating. This will be there forever. This anchor isn't going anywhere. After completing delivery of the atomic bomb components, the USS Indianapolis left Guam on July 28th. On July 30th, 1945, just after midnight, the Indianapolis was struck by two torpedoes from the Japanese submarine I-58 because of a series of miscommunications. And this is the part that's almost impossible to believe. Nobody reported her missing for 4 days. Another fascinating part of this expedition was the discovery of the guns. Indianapolis had 3 turrets. I believe this is the aft turret. Obviously 3 guns here in remarkably great condition. Access door on the side. And take a look, you've got some ladder rungs allowing the crew members to get into the door. Now, what did it look like 80 years earlier? This is actually an image of the second mount, forward facing. And you can see here, access door on the side. So compare that door right there to that door right there. On the forward guns, these ladder rungs go all the way up. On this aft-facing gun, it appears that they only had 2 to get up here. I don't see where any of the others would have been ripped off. I don't see any welding marks. So I think in the back gun, only 2 ladder rungs to get the crew members through this hatch. This next image, also of the aft-facing gun, access hatch. Looks like it's filled with all kinds of debris, but there are those 2 ladder rungs. Then over here, you see the other access hatch, and I've got some images that'll relate to that. Here is the stern-facing gun, the 2 access hatches there and there. Going back, there, and there. Now, here's another image, stern-facing gun. The stern was seriously collapsed. You can see the face of the turret, the collapsed section of the hull. This is one of the forward-facing turrets that was ripped from the hull and landed in the silt. And you can see a lot of the same stuff, but we're going to be keying in on some other features. So here is the rear hatch. And this is an image of that exact same turret. Rear hatch. There was a forward hatch. You know, look at this. The rungs go all the way up for, just behind the forward hatch. The rungs behind this rear hatch only go up 2. So for this rear-facing gun, forward hatch, the rungs only went up 2. Now, let's pay attention to this feature up here. So we talked about the hatch. There's the hatch, there's the rear, and then here is that feature right there. Now, I think it was called stereo range finding, but instead of one point of view, you would have a series of mirrors, one on one side and then one on the other side of the gun to help determine range. I believe this was one of those. A view from the top, rangefinder on the one side, and it looks like the housing was ripped off, but the tube for that rangefinder still exists. Here's another view, and you can see here are those rangefinder housings. And I hope somebody can help clarify this in the comments, but I think it literally was a system of mirrors that would come out on either side. These are little doors that could be opened, I believe, that would come out on the other side. Now, this one over here, it looked like this housing was ripped off, right? Because if you go back to this image here, it's been totally ripped off. Close up of that rangefinder where the housing was ripped off. When you're first presented with this image of the turret, when I first saw it, I thought, well, is this just the remainder of one of the guns? Oh, and then here's the hatch, though. When you see that hatch down below, then you automatically have to compare it to this image here. Hatch, hatch. That's got to be the rangefinder. That's not a gun. But it was confusing me for a while, and I'm sure it was confusing to a lot of other people, because when they present this image and they say, this is the turret from the Indianapolis, well, the first thing you conclude is, oh, well, this must be one of the guns. And that's why I can spend hours doing this stuff, because I just want to learn. It's like, what actually am I looking at, and where is it on the ship? When they present this, it's like, that can't be a gun, but what could it be? And this is a picture of a sailor standing on the housing of that rangefinder, waving signal flags. But what a crazy place to stand. Here's the other thing. So we talk about the housing getting ripped off, and look at the bolts going all the way around that cast housing for that rangefinder. He's standing on it, so it's a pretty heavy feature. Those bolts are huge compared to his foot. Imagine dropping one of those on your foot. So for this to get ripped off of that turret, I don't see any bolt holes. So that leads me to believe the heads of the bolts were ripped off. The bolts are probably still in there. The heads were just ripped off, and that housing obviously totally gone, leaving that viewfinder tube here. So cool. Now, take a look at this. This is a real close-up shot of the periscope. So the gun director inside that turret would be looking through this periscope. So this is the periscope. That could be the periscope right there on this turret. There it is, periscope, or at least the base of one. I don't know if that could retract or not. So when you compare it to this image here, periscope, periscope, so cool. In just 12 minutes, the ship was gone. 880 men went into the open ocean. Few life rafts, and no rescue signal confirmed. As time went on, there were sharks, intense heat, and dehydration. Hallucinations quickly set in among the crew after 5 days in the water. And when it was all over, just 316 survivors. Here's another image that everyone was excited about, and I was too. This is an extremely cluttered image showing all kinds of debris, but prominently in the middle, ship's bell. So everyone was excited to find this. However, people looked at this image and it's like, oh, well, wait a second. There's a ship's bell. Here's another ship's bell right here. But why would you have two bells right next to each other? And where on the ship is this? Here is an image that I found in the National Archives. And if you haven't had a chance to play around with the U.S. National Archives website, it's so fascinating. The website's a little clunky, but once you get the hang of it, it's really cool. Now, this image was taken during the Mare Island refit. I believe it was 1943 is when the Mare Island refit took place. And this image, for whatever reason, they were highlighting with these circles in this image gun mount locations, but that's not what we're going to pay attention to. Take a look at this right here. And don't worry, we're going to zoom in on it, but it looks like you see one of the bells. Zooming in, you can start to see, oh, wait a second, that's not a bell, it's a loudspeaker. Here's an even closer look. Loudspeaker, and here's that bell sitting underneath. So that what everyone thought was a bell turns out, no, it was a loudspeaker. And it makes sense because the bell being brass, it's not going to corrode. It's not going to rust, and wildlife aren't going to attach themselves to it. No incrustations or anything like that. And I've watched other YouTube channels say it's like, oh, okay, they've got two bells, one right next to each other. Why would they do that? And it's an honest mistake. I'm not going to criticize anybody. But when you take the time to analyze these images, you realize it's not two bells, loudspeaker, bell. But to make sure we're looking at the same thing, what other features can we pick out? I was actually looking for gun mounts. You can't really find any. At least I couldn't. But, you know, the loudspeaker, the bell, and what else can we find? So I started to look for this because we found the loudspeaker and we found the bell. I started to look for these boxes, couldn't find any. But this feature right here, I started to poke around. And so there's the loudspeaker, there's the bell. Some of those boxes, I thought maybe this locker got ripped off, but I eventually found this. And if you take a look at that and you compare it to this right there, there it is. There it is. So that's what helped me understand that This is that portion of the ship. It's pretty clear. You got the loudspeaker above and the bell, but you want some other confirmation, right? And absent of these gun mounts, I couldn't find them, but I did find that. This confirms that's from that part of the ship. So again, just you can spend hours looking at this stuff. Loudspeaker, bell. I'm not exactly sure what that is, but it is clear as day right there. I always have a fascination, and everybody does, with a ship's hull number, because if you can find the hull number on a shipwreck, then you have positively identified that wreck. This is an image of the Indianapolis's hull number. The Indianapolis was CA-35. And there is the 35. Here's the interesting thing. Let's go to an image that was taken in the 1940s. And you can see here the bow. You can barely see the 35. But here's the other interesting thing. The Indianapolis was a little different. Most U.S. warships had the hull number on the bow. The Indianapolis also had the hull number on the stern. And you can kind of see the 35. Here's another image of the stern. 35, clear as day. Another picture of the stern right here. 35, clear as day, underneath this gun tub. So on the hull, a lot of people, me included, thought, oh, well, that's an image of the 35 on the stern of the Indianapolis. Regardless, it identifies or positively identifies this wreck is the Indianapolis. But where is this 35 appearing? You see a lot of debris lying around. It's like, well, this could be from the stern. Let's take a closer look. Here's the one we looked at just a little bit ago. Of the stern, 35. But here's one of the bow, 35. But if you go straight above the 35, there's a porthole. And that's what prompted me to look closer. There were portholes all over the Indianapolis. Some of them were blanked over, but there were portholes everywhere. This image here, you don't really see a porthole there too far away, but you can see, there's a string of portholes there. No portholes back here that you can see, but there's some up here. And then take a look. There is a porthole directly above this 35. So when I thought it was aft on the stern of the ship, turns out there's a porthole right above the 35. That actually has to be the bow. In total, 879 men were lost. At the time, it was the worst naval disaster at sea in U.S. Navy history. But because no one had reported her missing, and because the Navy assumed she'd arrived at her destination safely, those 880 men were alone floating in the Pacific for nearly 5 days. Some of the other stuff that I get fascinated with are images like this. I love hatchways. I love portholes. I just think there's mystery surrounding it. And it may not be attached to a turret. It may not be attached to or a part of the bridge, just any part of the ship. When I see an open hatchway, when I see this, I just am immediately fascinated. It's like, where on the ship is this? Busted out porthole right there. Where on the ship is this? Now, it's a great image by itself, but no, I just can't be happy with that. I need to figure out where on the ship is this. Okay, so that's the next mission here. Now, here's an earlier image of the Indianapolis before it had the bridge superstructure conversion at Mare Island. I think that was 1943. So this is pre-World War II, a little bit older photograph, but we're going to start looking at these hatchways here. What hatchway could that be? Hatchway here, here, here. Now this is post Mare Island. Hatchway, hatchway. There. Here's another one. So let's try and figure out where that door was. Let's go back. Door, 3 portholes, ladder rungs. And you can see because here is the hull of the Indianapolis down here, stanchions, which would have supported some cables possibly. So obviously a walkway, but then it breaks off and it started to make me think, well, this might be heading towards the back of the ship or possibly the front of the ship. But if you go back to those ladder rungs right here, and there was a rust streak or something, but it also could be different colored paint. And again, 3 portholes. So you've got ladder rungs between 2 portholes down from this open hatch. And when I saw this, I'll be damned, ladder rungs between 2 portholes down from the hatch. You don't see it up on this level at all. So going back to that image there, ladder rungs, different colored paint. There we go. So that kind of made me believe it's like, well, this is the door we're talking about right there. But then look, that looks like some ductwork, and you've got this weird feature here, this question mark looking piece of ductwork. And if you go back, there you go. There it is. And there's that question mark piece of ductwork. Here is another view of that walkway, the stanchions right here holding the cables, but you can see this is where it bends or turns towards the bow underneath the second turret. So porthole, 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 hatch, ladder rungs right there. And this is where the walkway opens up to the bow. And you can also kind of see that ductwork we were talking about. Porthole, 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 ladders. This is where the walkway opens up to the bow. Take a look at this image. Here's another one. All right. Here's our question mark. There's that piece of ductwork right there. So there's our question mark, ductwork. Question mark, ductwork. And you can see how it bends, the walkway opens up to the bow. So this hatch here is definitely that guy right there, left open. Now, what's cool is that Vulcan, RV Petrel, had a close-up. There's one of those stanchions holding the cable. The door is wide open. Can't really see what's inside there. So that's how I was able to identify where on the ship this was. The forward starboard side under the second turret. That hatch. Took me a few hours to figure that one out, but that's, for me, that's a great way to spend an evening. So putting all of these together, for me, that's part of the fun. You know, you just look for these details, and it'll tell you so much exactly where on the ship these images are coming from. Now, if one of you know where this hatch goes, what it leads to, what this particular area of the ship was for, comments, leave it in the comments. I want to know. I want to know what could be behind this door. What would be through these portholes? Yeah, if somebody could tell me what would have been in there, I would love to know. If you're enjoying this now and then comparison of images of the USS Indianapolis, then I hope you'll consider subscribing to History X, because we've got a lot more coming, including the wreck of the aircraft carrier USS Yorktown. What is this? What is this? And it doesn't take you long. You know, you could see hatchway here, door here, but it doesn't take you long to key in on some other details. And those details, like for example, when you look at this here, oh, anchor chain. And you look at this here, there's this star shape. you're tempted to look at this from like a sideways perspective, but then after a while you realize that may not be the case. Anchor chain, star, and this is an image that also exists. It exists. I found it in two different places: the National Archives, and then also a naval. It's escaping me. A naval source. Anyway, this should be going vertical, up and down. I turned it sideways to help identify what it is we're looking at. And going back to this image here, I was more fascinated with the star because the anchor chain already told me this is going to be in the bow, but where in the bow? And where does this hatch come from? Looking at this image here, look at the top of these two capstans for the anchor chain, and they have stars cast in them. You can see them right there. And of course, there's the anchor chain. Looking at this feature here, it looks like that's another capstan to the side of each one. And then going back, there we go. There it is. There's that other capstan. After a while, I started to realize, oh, this hatch was just kind of blown out and it landed here. So that had nothing to do with it. But which capstan are we looking at here? And which end is the bow? Well, it breaks off here. And it's like, okay, let's go take a look at this feature or at this photograph. And you can see teak deck, the capstans here, but then this bulkhead, the teak ends right here. And this has to be a bulkhead where the bow was sheared off and landed at the bottom of the ocean. And when you make note of this feature here where the teak ends, obviously a bulkhead, capstan with a star in it, that's got to be the bulkhead right there. This is where the bow sheared off and landed. So that tells me this is the port anchor chain capstan right there with this other one next to it. I hope I'm using the right terms. If it's not the capstan and you want to call it something else, throw it in the comments. Let me know. But I think that's what this is called. And what we're looking at here is going to be this guy right here, because there's that other winch or that capstan above it. And that's what we see right here. So the bow is now lying on its side in the silt, the mud at the bottom, and it's been sheared off right here, right where the teak deck ends at this bulkhead right there. So the bow is totally sheared off. There's the star. I just keep going back and forth to these photos. There's the star. That's how we know what we're looking at right here. Another crumpled piece of the Indianapolis. So what are we looking at? I remember skipping over this photo because I couldn't really figure out, there wasn't a lot of detail. But then when just like everything else, when you start looking at it and you realize the possibilities that some of the other images throw at you, it's like, okay, believe it or not, this is an airplane. And you can say, it's like, well, what makes you think it's an airplane? Well, first of all, go back. So the Indianapolis, believe it or not, was an aircraft carrier. The Indianapolis at one time had 2 catapults and carried 4 airplanes. And this is an image right here. I think it was called a Curtiss Seahawk. This is what one of those float planes looked at. So you had 4 of these aboard at one time. Now, when the Indianapolis went down, I think in that Mare Island conversion, the refit, they removed one of the catapults. And so instead of 2, it only had 1 catapult. And at the time, it carried 1 plane. And I believe This is the remains of that plane. So bear with me. This one took a lot of work. So if this is an image of one of those Seahawks, how can we figure out if this is the one that went down with the Indianapolis? Because at the time of its sinking, it had one of these aboard, and it was used for scouting purposes, that type of thing. Well, this is what a Seahawk looks like. Float obviously underneath. Monoplane versus a biplane, like the Grumman Duck, being a biplane. The Seahawk was a single wing configuration. So taking a look at this wreckage here, it's still hard to try and figure out what it is we're looking at. But it wasn't until I took a look at this image right here, and this is a picture of a Seahawk getting hoisted out of the water. There's the float, there's the wings, pilot right here, that I started to realize what we're looking at. And if you think of this as the plane being flipped upside down, nose into the mud, nose into the silt, and then you back over to this image here, now it kind of helps you get oriented. So think of the plane flipped over, nose into the mud, and here's the canopy. Pilot sitting right there, obviously, and here's the canopy. So going back to this picture, nose into the mud, this is one of the wings. The tail has been broken off. But like I said, this is one of the wings. And then this would be the cockpit right here. Now, you got to go back and forth to the pictures. If this is the cockpit, let's take a closer look. Look at this. The cockpit, it's kind of a squared off hole in the fuselage. So squared off here, goes back, and you can see here it gets squared off again and then goes back. The canopy attaches and comes to a point in the back. Going to this underwater image here, look at what we got. Squared off cockpit here. And then look, teardrop shape attachment point where that canopy was, right? This is where the canopy was attached to the fuselage. If the plane is upside down, now nose into the mud, and I'm going to go back, there's the squared off portion of the cockpit, and then this is the teardrop. This is where the canopy mounted to the fuselage. There's the squared off portion, teardrop. That's where the canopy mounted to the fuselage. I think that's pretty cool. So they found the one plane that was aboard the Indianapolis at the time that it sank. Okay, stay with me, because the last comparison in this sequence, for me, hits hardest. Here is an image of a 40mm Bofors anti-aircraft gun. Pretty great photo. We talked about the turret earlier, but this is another great image right here. And there's so many things going on here. Obviously, you've got the gun tub. Take a look here, still loaded with the 40mm ammunition. But I wanted to find out where on the ship was this? Because the Indianapolis had anti-aircraft guns all over the place. So start looking at other images. Now, this is the image we used earlier to identify the ship's bell, okay, because there's a loudspeaker, the ship's bell's right there. And here are some circles denoting different aircraft gun positions. This is a 20mm anti-aircraft gun right there. Covered up 40mm twin Bofors gun right there. But going back to that picture, this is more of an isolated, rounded gun tub than what you might see here. So it's like, okay, that's not the spot. But then I looked up here, and this one is definitely rounded, more isolated. and met a lot of these features right here, rounded, more isolated. There's a dent in the gun tub right here, but you can see it just goes all the way around and then meets this other feature right here. And if you go back to this photo, start to see it's rounded, but let's zoom in. Rounded gun tub, but then take a look. It's got this other feature attached to it leading down to this lower platform right here. Keep an eye on that, because when I go back to this photo, now all of a sudden, what do we see? The gun tub goes all the way around, and then there is that feature right there. So that leads me to believe this particular gun tub is on the starboard side of the Indianapolis towards the top of the superstructure. So what would that be? 3 decks up? 3 levels up? Yeah, that's got to be it. Yeah. So you see that curved piece going back. There's that curved piece. There we go. This gun tub is on the starboard side, 3 levels above deck on the Indianapolis. Right there. Now, the Indianapolis didn't just carry the bomb that ended the war. She carried the men who made it happen. And for 4 days, the Navy she served forgot where she was. Now, the wreck down there, those images that we've been reviewing, that's not a disaster site. If you think about it, that's a memorial that nobody built on purpose. And that's the beauty of it. Now, if you want more shipwreck deep dives like this one, then check out this video.